Campaign 2020 is sponsored by Wisconsin Hospital Association, Quick Trip, Wisconsin Counties Association, Wisconsin Realtors Association, and Wisconsin Operating Engineers Local 139.
And we're joined by Jacob Malinowski, who's a Democratic candidate from Greendale running in the 82nd Assembly District. Thanks for joining us, Jacob.
Thanks for having me.
I want to talk to you about, you've been critical of the incumbent in that district and the handling of coronavirus and the pandemic in Wisconsin. What do you think he and others in the legislature should be doing to try to combat the spread of COVID-19?
Yeah, I think there's really three primary ways to tackle this. Number one, we have to get back to work. So the state legislature right now hasn't passed a bill in months. I hope that changes because people need help. And no matter who you want to blame, whether it's the governor's office, whether it's a state agency, whether it's the Republican Party or the Democratic Party, folks need to sit down and actually talk to each other. So number one, we need to actually do something. We're paying these people salary. They should be working for us. Number two, we need a plan. It's really unfortunate that the Supreme Court knocked down Safer at Home because now we've been free riding no matter where you are. And while I'm a huge proponent of local control, it's unfortunate because this virus is not a local control issue. It affects our whole state and our whole country and the entire world. So we need to sit down and have a data-driven, research-backed, science-backed plan. And number three, we actually have to be focused on helping individual people. I'm not worried about big corporations or big polluters or multi-billionaires getting their fair share. I want middle class and working folks like my family, like myself, to get the relief they need. Whether that's unemployment, whether that's making sure that our small businesses can stay open, whether that's investing in our public schools, making sure our kids and teachers and staff stay safe. We actually have to be focused on real people, not these big groups and taking multi-million-dollar loans to help them. So that's what I would like to see is a science-backed plan, getting to work and doing that plan and making sure that plan helps real people.
The pandemic has also affected government, obviously, and the governor has warned that tax collections could fall by as much as $2 billion this year. To address that potential shortfall, would you cut government spending or try to raise taxes and fees to offset that loss, or some combination? How would you address that shortfall?
Yeah. And of course, nobody wants to hear that their spending is being cut or that their taxes are being raised, because that's a really difficult choice to make. And I'd like to see some sort of fair balance and making sure that middle class families in my district, anyone who makes under $250,000 shouldn't have their taxes raised or their services cut. And so we need to make sure we're focusing on those groups of people. So those who can afford to pay, the multi-billionaires in our state who have made money off of COVID-19, we need to make sure that's where we're getting our revenue from, and we're not cutting any sort of essential services. Now is not the time to be cutting back. People need help, and they need help from their government, which can provide these essential services. So I want to see some sort of mix of the two, but I don't want it to affect working and middle class families because they've already been hurt enough by this pandemic and the inaction of the state legislature. We need to make sure that we're still supporting them throughout the crisis and especially afterwards.
The state legislature is going to face a big issue coming up with redistricting. And I wanted to talk with you about who you think should draw the next set of maps. Governor Evers has started his People's Maps Commission to draw the maps and forward them to the legislature. Obviously, the Republicans who control the Capitol right now want to draw the new district lines for the congressional and legislative seats. Who do you think should draw those lines?
Yeah, so the 82nd district is almost all of Franklin. There is a small bit cut out. It is all of Greendale, and it is about a sixth of Greenfield. Greenfield is entirely gerrymandered, and there's a part of Franklin cut out for absolutely no reason. For too long in this country, whether it's Democrats or Republicans, Politicians have been choosing their voters, and we really need voters to choose their politicians. I'm not sure the process can ever be nonpartisan, so I'd like to enter with a bipartisan plan, making sure we have equal representation so that the process is actually fair, and we're drawing it based on census data, not on political data. So I support the People's Commission, but I'm not sure how far that's going to get, especially with the makeup of the legislature. So I'd like to see a plain plan that says we're going to have equal representation. We're going to draw these maps fairly so that we get representatives who are accountable to the people who vote for them. Right now, you can throw away your vote in so many districts because of how gerrymandered they are. That's not fair. And Democrats were doing it before, and now Republicans are doing it, and we just need to take that out of the equation.
Where do you stand in terms of legalizing medical marijuana, legalizing recreational marijuana? What do you think should be legal and what not?
Well, the marijuana is already, the numbers suggest that people overwhelmingly favor the legalization of especially medicinal marijuana, but even recreational marijuana. And we need to get moving and modernize our thoughts on medicinal marijuana. I talk to so many veterans here in our community who would benefit so much from the legalization of medical marijuana, especially for things like PTSD and their mental health. So we need to get the ball rolling on that quickly. Then I would like to see one very comprehensive study done by the Department of Health Services and the legislature in joint to see if the economic benefits we think we will get from legalizing marijuana will actually happen in Wisconsin. So see if we will look like a Colorado. If that's plan and that study looks like how I think it will look, then we should move on a path towards legalizing recreational marijuana. It would bring in so much revenue, which especially during the pandemic, our state could use. And if we're ahead of our neighbors on it, we're going to get outside revenue from that as well. Dollars pouring into Wisconsin, as well as dollars circulating in Wisconsin. And then we need to have the conversation on why we're locking up and taking up valuable resources in our prisons for folks who are nonviolent first-time offenders who had a small amount of marijuana on them, and now we've locked them away and we're spending taxpayer dollars on them for no good reason. That's the sort of three-part plan I'd like to see when elected.
One of the areas where we see a lot of inequality is in the criminal justice system, but there are clearly other areas in Wisconsin. What do you think should be done to address racial inequalities, disparities, systemic racism in the state?
Yeah, what do I think should be done to fix racism is a very hard question, especially to boil down in a small interview. But I think it starts with listening. Right now, we have a representative who doesn't care enough to actually listen to the folks in this community and has said nothing about Black Lives Matter or the murder of George Floyd and hasn't shown up to any of the rallies, especially the peaceful protests done here in our community. And I have. It's about listening, and especially as a straight white dude, I'm never going to understand what it means to live that experience. But with open ears and an open mind, I think that's the best place to start. My general thought is it needs to be a two-way street of trust and accountability. That means citizens have more of a say in how their police work, and we actually see true community policing, and we see folks start to form those relationships. I have a great relationship with the police, and if I ever see a police officer out, we have a great conversation, and that's why I think a lot of folks around here don't understand that it's a problem. If you're friendly to the police and they're friendly to you, there's clearly no issue. But that's not how everyone in our community is treated. We've got a lot of really good police officers here in the 82nd District, but it is a two-way street on trust and accountability. And so I'd like to see that as at least a first step. So I'm doing a lot of listening. That's where we get a lot of the ideas that I talk about are from members of our community.
When it comes to property taxes, Wisconsin has some of the highest in the nation. And as a result of that, we see school districts, local governments, where they're limited or capped in terms of their levies. If you're elected, would you vote to keep the property tax caps or eliminate them to kind of free up the limits that school districts are facing? Although obviously they can pass referendums too, but do you think they should have more freedom to be free of those caps?
Right. So property tax is a huge issue, especially around here where a lot of folks own their own home. And the big problem with property taxes right now around here is that it's not a sustainable, predictable flow of income when we are passing school district referendums here, overwhelmingly so every few years here in our community. So if we're passing those referendums and asking for the levy to be raised year after year after year, except it's unpredictable, it doesn't seem like to me we would need those property tax freezes. However, I understand that property tax is a big burden, especially on low income folks who worked hard to own their property. It's things like retirees or our seniors. I understand, especially because you see how much that number is on your property tax bill. So it can feel really overwhelming when you have to pay it. So I want to see more rebates, more discounts, and more tax income returned, especially to folks who worked hard, own their own property. They shouldn't be punished for having 40 or 50 years in the workforce. So I think there's a delicate balance that needs to be done. But as a strong proponent of local control, I want to make sure our municipalities can raise the revenue that they think needs to be raised.
Some counties and municipalities, actually, obviously all in the state rely on the property tax to fund more than 40% of the costs of services they provide. Do you think it's time to consider alternative sources of revenues for local governments? For example, to be able to levy, half-cent local sales tax, for example, as you've probably heard from Milwaukee City and County have been pushing for those types of local sales taxes.
Yeah, I think there needs to be a strong economic analysis done of what these sorts of programs do to working and middle class folks. We talk a lot about the gas tax on the campaign trail, which is a regressive tax on people just trying to get to work. And so I want to see something like that lowered. The sales tax does not affect everyone equally, depending on how much money you make. And so I want to make sure that how we're raising revenue here is fair in terms of if you are a middle class and working class person, you shouldn't be unfairly punished. So yes, we need to look at how we're bringing in revenue, especially post COVID-19. And I don't want folks' property taxes to go up, but we need to be careful on just rushing into certain types of tax revenues because they sound like they'll bring in money. We need to make sure that those are directly targeted on the folks that we think we want to raise and don't want to raise revenue on.
Speaking of revenue and state spending, Wisconsin has never found a stable way to pay for its highways. Governor Evers had proposed raising the gas tax. Could you vote to raise the gas tax?
I know a lot of candidates come on here and they're kind of wishy-washy on it, especially the Democrats, because the Democratic Party has supported it, but it doesn't sound like a good idea. I'm categorically against it. And folks ask me all the time what sorts of policies I disagree with in the Democratic Party. I don't think an 8-cent raise on the price of fuel, which adds up to around $270 per car, is a fair way of raising revenue for the highways. We need to restructure the fees. I just bought a used car from my neighbor for $2,300. I paid about the same that you would pay on a vehicle of $20,000 or $40,000 when it comes to fees because they are flat. We need to make sure that we're targeting the folks who we want to raise revenue from, and that's big polluters who use our highways but don't pay their fair share. So I'm against the gas tax because I think it's regressive and I think it's a tax on people trying to get to work or go grocery shopping. But we need to restructure how we bring in transportation revenue, whether that's by taxing big polluters, whether that's by giving rebates for eco-efficient vehicles. We need to restructure that so we're not punishing families here in the 82nd District.
One of the other areas that the pandemic has hit are healthcare providers in the state. We've seen, obviously, that hospitals are playing a huge role in trying to combat the virus. Do you think that the legislature should make hospitals a higher priority in the next state budget?
Yeah, so of course, we're going to be talking a lot about healthcare for a long time. Nobody knows what's going to happen with this pandemic in the next 3, 6, 12, 18 months. And not only is the science changing, but how we react to it is changing as well. And we've been fortunate so far on hospital capacity here in the state of Wisconsin. That's because of a lot of the hardworking doctors and nurses we have who make up our hospitals. But of course, we're going to be talking a lot about healthcare. I think one of the first things we need to do is take the free federal money that's sitting on the table for Medicaid expansion, which the state legislature prohibited Governor Evers from doing and didn't do themselves. It's free money from the federal government to help the healthcare of those who need it the most. And then, of course, we've got to be talking about our infrastructure for our hospitals, especially if this virus is going to stick around. We can't just bury our head in the sand. We need to be following the science and making sure that our hospitals can take care of anyone who gets sick.
Do you think that businesses that follow all of the COVID-19 practices and recommendations should be immune from lawsuits?
Yeah, this is not a yes or no question. And I especially don't want to see businesses punished because they can't keep up with the change of regulations or highly strict regulations that might not apply to their mom and pop shop. So I want to make that clear from the get-go that I'm not in the business of punishing folks simply for trying to keep up with the legislature and doing their best efforts. But on the other hand, like you say, if you're following every single regulation, just like you would for workplace safety, just like you would for anything else, then we need to make sure that the business isn't unfairly liable, especially for something like a virus. So if you're following health and safety, you're protecting your employees, you're looking out for your community, I want to make sure you get something in return to show that we really value your good faith effort to keep folks safe.
When it comes to local governments authorizing public works projects, do you think bidding and standards, the requirements should give preferences to Wisconsin companies, local companies versus out of state?
Of course, that's how the math adds up. If we can keep our dollars in Wisconsin, those dollars circulate over and over and over again. And I want to be helping folks who are around here. I'm proud to be the only candidate in the primary endorsed by local unions and working folks across our community. My dad is a carpenter. His dad owned his own union shop here in Milwaukee. And I think it's important that we keep that money within the state. When we give it to out-of-state corporations in Arizona or California, we're never going to see those dollars again. And if those public work projects don't work out, we're going to have a hard time getting them back here to fix it. I trust the work ethic of Wisconsin folks, especially our working people. And I trust that we'll be able to invest in them and keep those dollars circulating in our local economy.
And we're almost out of time, but I wanted to give you a chance to say what sets you apart from your primary opponent. Why do you think you're the best candidate for this office?
Yeah, I think it's pretty clear. I've lived here my entire life. This is where I learned how to ride a bike. I went to public school here and graduated from them, sat on the school board. I'm the local candidate who kind of gets this area. And if you're looking for new leadership, we're going to need someone who understands our community uniquely and is actually running on real ideas. Unlike my primary opponent, we have over 200 detailed policy ideas on our website, actually giving folks a reason to vote for us as opposed to just generic talking points. I think the third clear reason is the folks who have publicly stated they're supporting our campaign. Day after day, we get more and more people who are joining publicly, and my opponent can't say the same thing. And so while I think he's a great guy, it's clear who, by the finance reports or by actual policy ideas or the strength of our campaigns, who's the best candidate in November and who's the best fit here for our district.
Are there any other important campaign issues that we haven't touched on yet that you want to address?
How long you got? If we've got another 4 hours, I'd love to explain it all. I would just encourage folks to check out the policy section on our website, electjacob.com/policy, and also see the plans we've got for being an involved legislator. because I don't think this is just about ideas. I don't claim to be the expert on any sort of policy. I don't think our legislators need to be. They need to admit when they don't know or when they're wrong on things. And so we have a whole personal section of our website dedicated to hosting regular town halls and coffee chats, for showing up to meetings, for getting more people engaged. I'd encourage folks to check that out.
Well, thank you so much for your time, Jacob. We really appreciate it.
Yes, thanks so much for having me.
Campaign 2020 is sponsored by Wisconsin Hospital Association, Quick Trip, Wisconsin Counties Association, Wisconsin Realtors Association, and Wisconsin Operating Engineers Local 139.